Hey, welcome back to another episode of Network and Chill. I am your co-host Red, joined with my co-host Rick. What's going on, brother?
What up, bro?
Man, exciting times right now. Really looking forward to our guest today. But before we get into that, it's Derby season here in Kentucky, here in DeVille.
Yeah.
150. So it is really cool. The energy we're gonna have in the city. And as we do always, I'm looking forward to some unique, experiences that we'll be a part of this year, and opportunities to get into the right room, network with the right people, and have a good time at the, all in one. Really looking forward to our collaboration with Maker's House again. I know we collaborated last year on the polo event. This year, great opportunities. Opening night dinner on Thursday night. We have a brunch on Friday that we'll be a part of, and Saturday morning as well, and then access to the Coterie Club, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. Great entertainment, great people, great just opportunities to fellowship and be around a great community. All these events will be at the Omni. Tickets have gone pretty quickly, so we have a few left from our allocation. Some great sponsors will be in the building, and we'll have some special perks if you get your tickets through Network and Chill. So uh, great, times ahead of us, and so I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, man. Come out and kick it with us. And like I said, we'll be down at the Omni Thursday through Saturday. So just drop by anytime and just hang out. I mean, the dinners are going to be, great 4-course meals, 5-course meals during the dinners and the brunches. Yeah, bring the wife, come out and kick it, man. It's going to be a good time.
Yeah, and so today, we have a great founder that we're gonna talk to today, and have some really unique conversations. So, Rick, kick it off, and let's introduce our founder and CEO and bring him to the stage.
Yeah. So it gives me a great pleasure to introduce, I'd say, one of the funniest founders in our ecosystem right now, Dan Ross Lee, the founder of Affinna. Affinna aims to revolutionize ticket buying with a new platform that simplifies the process in 20 seconds or less. Previously at StubHub, Ross Lee leverages his insights to cut cost and enhance user experience, making ticket purchasing painless and quick. What's up, Dan?
What's up, guys? What's up, Ricky? Love the intro and love the energy, and it's great to be here.
Yeah, glad to
Man,
have you, bro.
thank you, Dan. We're glad to have you. It's been overdue. Um, I think you're just coming back from South by Southwest, so we kind of scheduled this call intentionally to have this interview with you after that. Before we get into that experience itself, what motivated you to found Afina, and what gap did you see in the market to really start that?
Yeah. So just really quick, as Ricky mentioned, I used to work at StubHub. There's a lot of money flowing through that organization, and that really kind of the light bulb gets kicked off, and you're like, why is that money not going back to the artist, right? Like, why are all these hands being interchanged, and why are there so many middlemen or women in the business? And that really had me start looking closely at the industry and saying like, hey, let's try something here, because with money comes opportunity, and if it's money that other people can get, or you, the original artist or musician or sports team, can get, that's definitely something that would motivate people to try to take action and try to do something different.
Yeah, so building up on those insights from StubHub, what were those key things that made you say, "Hey, this is an opportunity to start a company"? And what were those, key insights or new things that you thought that Affinna could bring to the market?
Yeah. So I think it's maybe there's two parts of this. One is always like the original vision, and then the other thing that I think a lot of founders go through is that how your idea pivots and morphs and changes over time. And I think one thing we didn't do so well at Afina is the original idea was like, you should know who's coming to your event, right? There's no concept of identity. There's just a concept of ticket. So we started with that premise of like, you should know every individual, whether they bought it on the primary on your website or the secondary on StubHub. You should know every buy from us directly and save a few dollars, right? Or have a better experience or better purchasing experience. So that was the original intent.
Yeah, I love it. And as you think about the original intent, many times, I think founders or potential founders have ideals and they never get off the ground because it's kind of daunting to say, let's start a company, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so just sort of taking it back a little bit, what were your initial steps to really get the company off the ground? And maybe what were some of those early challenges that you maybe faced? Can you like break that down, how you really decided to launch the company and get it started?
Yeah. Sorry. I think I do have to. I'm at Story right now, and there's a little bit of internet issues. Do you mind if I'll hop on my
Yeah, let's pause this.
All right. So yeah, I think I would just say like I dove right in, and I probably made every mistake every founder make. Like I just remember like we were on a call, and a customer asked like, "Oh, how do we pay you?" And we didn't even have like a company set up or a bank account set up or any of those like basic things. And then you're just like, "Oh, dang, like we got to set that up." And I would say like um the one part, like we made every mistake of setting up a company. Like we just did, between getting accounting set up and the banking set up and the administrative, like the legal framework, and you're just asking around, like, hey, what did you use to do that? What did you use to do payroll? Right, was a big one. Like, how did I pay? How do I pay people? What bank did you use? What legal documents did you use? Did you use what lawyers did you use? And I would say like you're never going to know all the answers ahead of time, right? Like it definitely talk to founders, go through an accelerator program, but like there's so much to know. Like um, I always take it. It's like the best thing I would say is like it's like love and marriage, right? Like you can read as many books as you want about love and marriage, but like you got to go through it. Like, and you're gonna make every mistake along the way. Like you're gonna say the wrong things, you're gonna do the wrong things, but like experience at that end, like do some prep work. But you can, to those founders sitting on the fence, like you can read all the books and do all the prep work ahead of time, and you'll still never, you know what I mean? Like you'll
Yeah.
still never get all the information down. It's until you go through the process, right? And yeah, just dive right in, knowing that like you're not going to know everything, right? And then yeah, just try to swim as fast as just like love and marriage, right? Like yeah, just keep going, and then you'll get to the other side. And if it maybe more like dating, I'll say, and if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, it's something about the execution, right, man? It's getting out there, doing something, getting your hands dirty, no matter what you might encounter, and being willing to, solve those problems as quickly and as fast as
Yeah.
possible. And pulling those tools out of your tool belt, I think, is something to be said. And I think that people discount that experience, too often. We're running at the NBA real quick, and now we're
Yeah.
ready to run a startup company. And no, it doesn't work
And
like that. I mean,
and then you get the golden handcuffs too. Like you get the nice job offer after, and you get more educated, and you basically know too much, right? Like your opportunity costs are too high. You don't, and it doesn't. And I would say like just get the real life MBA, right? Go go start a business. It's going to be probably cheaper than an MBA, and you'll get all the same experience, right? And maybe at the end you'll have a great company too, right? And your own
right,
job, right? Yeah.
man. Or at least show that you have the expertise to do that. I think that that's one of the other things is like the experience that you get during startup. I mean, is definitely applicable for going back into the corporate world. And me, I went from a technical, guy and engineer to, on the business side of things, like running a company. So I think that that kind of shows that you can, do those other things. You're versatile with your skill set. So I think it's awesome to just like say, get out there and do something, man. That's what I just keep telling people. Get out there and do something. I don't
Yeah.
care. Run
Yeah.
with the idea.
Yeah, it's like we should coin a phrase like you win by trying, not by the result, right? Like just the fact that you tried, it's that's the win, right?
Facts.
Yeah.
Facts of that. I love that. I think Stevens, talked about this, like, the practical application to get that real world knowledge. You can go through accelerators, you can, read the books, but
Mhm.
without application and actually doing it, I think you don't actually learn these
Yeah.
tools, and you don't grow and develop and execute. And
Oh
so
yeah.
you're talking about, you're really going into, and you dove right in. It sounds like you just dove right in and started applying that. So early on, how did you go sell the vision and assemble a team to join you along the way?
Ooh, man. You gotta you gotta try everything, right? Talk to a bunch of people, try everything, and just get used to getting a ton of no's, right? Um, that's one. And I think too often times your outcome, like assembling a team, it's like you're selling a vision, right? And you're selling a vision that's so crazy that's why it probably hasn't started in the first place, right? Like you're gonna get a ton of no's. Um, and so what I did is like, I knew I was moving to Louisville. I was living at the Bay Area at the time. And I just remember calling, like not even knowing anybody here, just calling people around here, being like, hey, can you tell me more? Hey, like I'm moving, like I didn't even know, I still don't know what the Waterston Expressway is. Is that 264 or 265? Like I just know people say it and then I'll Google it afterwards. But like, people are name dropping like these roads, and I'm like, I'm not like I've never spent a day in the city, right? And so, but that's what you call people there, right? I knew we were moving, and that's how you just get started. Build your network. I was building my network before I even got there, and a lot of people like will pass you along and recommend you and refer you, and I would just encourage like you just got to try so many things. And I think like looking back on it, like the best recruiting source we got was like we reached out to University of Louisville before I got there, and we're like, hey, like I'm going to be there in like I don't know, November, I think. Like, can I start recruiting people now, right? And that's been like a wonderful pipeline of talent, and it's an incredible job the school does of training great engineers. But that's been like such a passionate and an energetic base to help build a company off of. They're enthusiastic. They learn super quick, and so that was one of the key successes. The other side of building a team is just like you just get those random opportunities, like even just how I met you guys, right? Like just talking to people, and you just bump into people, and you tell them more, and they buy into the vision, and they give it a shot, and you're like, you can't discount just raw. You got to put yourself out there, right? And maybe to Rick's point of like, you know at the MBA level, people teach you, like I call it like it's a very prescriptive path, right? Like you talk to somebody, you'll get something, right? You do this task, you'll get something. And I think one probably thing that even I myself had to get used to was like you're gonna get a lot of no's, you're gonna like get a lot of soft no's, right, or quiet no's, right? But more importantly, like a lot of the times, like you're just gonna get a delayed yes, right? And so you might talk to 20 people, um, and eventually that conversation 3 or 4 months down the road can convert to a yes, but it's not going to be right then and there, like what you would see at school or within a workplace, right?
Man, so many good points, Dan. You're talking through things that Rick and I talk about on a regular basis, right?
Yeah,
That networking piece, or building
yeah,
relationships, and doing it prior, being proactive of how you do it, because you never know how those relationships grow, develop, and how what can come out of that, and being intentional doing it. And so I heard so many just gems in that of being proactive, building a network before you get to Louisville, reaching out to the school, U of L, to really look at that pipeline for talent development, because many times founders say they can't find talent, but it seems like you found some great talent really quickly. And so it lets you know that you need more people putting themselves out there, putting themselves in new
yeah,
environments to really
yeah,
create those relationships.
yeah. No, absolutely, 100%.
Yeah, Rick, you're on mute,
Oh,
so come on off mute.
yep. No, I think I was saying that it's one of the things I think a lot of folks, here talk about the talent, and I think that that's kind of comes from that corporate mindset, and a lot of people are
Yeah,
using these old tech stacks that it's hard to find
yeah,
tech stack when you're using something that isn't agile or that's, very corporate. So I think that that's one of the big problems. Why these folks can't find, talent around here. They're using old technology to begin with because they're using that same, corporate stack that they, came over with that's tried and true, that they don't want to move too fast to break anything. So I think that that's one of those keys for founders is, hey, you might not be able to use that same tech stack that your 100-year-old company is using. You need to switch that up.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. They talk about, it was so funny. It's like the post office now is still on, I think, COBOL or something, and they can't find people to program in that language because nobody's teaching that anymore. It's like everybody.
Nobody.
Yeah. And so like, if I'm sure most corporates aren't to that extreme where it's like 65 plus are the only demographic, but like, there is talent here. Yeah. And I've seen it firsthand. These people coming out of the school are talented, but you got to meet them at the middle of like, hey, they're learning off of technology today, which should be a benefit to you, right? But it is going to be difficult if you're on even a 5 or 10-year-old tech stack, right? Like, I'll just throw out there like one thing. I use Slack. That's like the corporate. There was like Instant Messenger or Skype, I think, for Microsoft, and then like Slack was like the startup thing, the 5-10 years ago. And now it's Discord. Like all the youngins are on Discord now. And like I feel like the new companies now are on Discord, right? If you have people who are 25 or younger, they're like, what's Slack? It's like, what do you guys use? They're like Discord. And then they see Slack and they're like, oh, it's like Discord. And I'm like, yeah, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think the young kids are, they're gaming, so they got introduced to, Discord and all that from a gaming standpoint, and then we come with Slack, got introduced from a corporate standpoint.
Yeah, and they're just like, just use Discord, and I'm like, the inertia is like, okay, yeah, if all you guys are already on it, sure, yeah,
right.
That's really funny. You talk about those like technologies is a great segue. How did you approach then, building your product? I seen, from afar and up close over, the last year or so of just quick iterations from you, beautiful product. What was your initial philosophy for design and developing your initial product, and how has it evolved as well?
Yeah. So I think, like we're still in the middle of the AI boom, right? And so that has been a huge supplement to just individual developer productivity. Like I can't describe to you, like we were fast before, and I feel like we're faster now, like even faster now. And like I think the All In podcast mentioned that they believe like there's going to be a one-man billion-dollar company eventually because there's so much productivity gain. Now, that's kind of a hyperbole, but like we're only 3 people, right? Like, and that's the crazy thing is like, and so the principles we had were just like, hey, we got to be, we have to have good infrastructure, like a good system design, a good framework, a good way to iterate quickly. We have to get the, level the playing field so that way we can move quickly, right? So like get all the, the corporate mindset of like, we can't sign these ginormous enterprise contracts, like, but at the same time, like we can be nimble and use the lightest, fastest architecture possible, right? And so that was like the first principle of like, how do we design our stack, our technology to be super quick and super nimble, not only as a user experience, but also as a development experience for developers, right? That's one. The second piece is we would try to prototype in public, right? So a lot of the times, like you guys got features where just like, hey, it's not fully built out, but like, can you try it, right? And I think that goes against the corporate mindset of, hey, we got to get all the product specs, like, and you can see it, like we'll do customer interviews, we'll do product specs, then we'll hand it off to engineering, and then it goes through system checks. Even if you do 2 weeks, the fastest you can move is 6 weeks, right? For us, it was just like, hey, like, Chris, this is a prototype. Can you use it? And you would provide the feedback almost right away, like just day of, right? And we'd be like, all right, let's look at this. He didn't care about that. Like, let's put more emphasis on this. And so by building in public, it's just a philosophy that you have to, I would say the first thing is you have to get the buy-in of the customers, right? Your users, like let them know like, hey, you're building in public. And it was simple things like we would have a banner like, this is a prototype, or like, this button is coming, right? Just so you had like an early signal of what's going on. And then you try to really hone in and try to get that rinse and repeat cycle. The second thing I would recommend is like, you can do it across customers, right? So like, you can have, if one customer takes you a week to get back to you, but if you had 5 customers and they're all kind of replying kind of randomly, right? Like, you can get feedback from Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So I think a lot of people get locked in on like, hey, I got to complete a whole life cycle of feedback with one customer. And I said, like, events are a really long cycle, right? Like, between creating your event and finishing the event, it's about 2 months usually, right? So rather than say like, hey, we're gonna every 2 months, we're gonna wait, or just say like, hey, Chris is starting his event. This will be a new feature you'll see in about 2 months. And then between then, I would say like live check-in was an example where we tested it. We had some bugs, right? But then between that first live check-in and your second live check-in, we had 3 other users use it, right? And each time we would say like, hey, this is the feedback from this one. This is the feedback from this one. And then, so we would have all that feedback, like 4 or 5 iterations of feedback between your 2 events. And so that's how we thought of, and it took us a while to get there, to figure out like, how do we solve these problems of like getting quick feedback, maybe just taking it even a further step back. It's like, we always thought of ourselves like a payment processor, right? Like a Toast tab or something, where you can see the feedback, like the customer comes in and buys their coffee and then they're done, right? And if there's a problem in that life cycle, you see it within the span of a minute. And for us, is a customer buys a ticket and they don't show up for 2 months, right? And so that's a huge life cycle. And then they show up. And so we had to think like, how do we iterate faster on that life cycle, right? Like, it is basically they come in and I can't wait 2 months. I can't wait 2 months for you. And so those were kind of hacks that we try to move faster on the customer discovery side. So we have the tech stack. We try to make it such that developers can move really quickly. The customer side, we try to say like, how do we can't make our customers move faster, but how do we draw insights faster from our customers? And then on the development team side, like, you just hire young, enthusiastic people, or not even, you just hire enthusiastic people and they get the job done. And I think like the biggest pride I have of the product now is that it's built by basically kids in college, right? Like, they're still in college and they've done a phenomenal job and executing and delivering. And it's when you hand them something like, I mean, they get excited because they're the owners of the product now and they want to see you guys happy, right? And to be able to offer that much power and responsibility, I think the younger generation, they want responsibility, right? They want the opportunity, and when given, they're willing to prove themselves above and beyond. Yeah.
There's 2 things there that you kind of hit on. I think one is that iteration and working with your customer from the beginning, throughout the life cycle of your product. And I think that that's so important, because oftentimes founders start a company, they just got an itch for something that they thought would be cool. And now they've spent the whole year building software that no one's touched or tested. And now they're like, hey, here's this product that everyone's going to love. And it usually doesn't kind of go that way. And they end up with something completely, different anyway than what they started with. So I think that that's one of those main keys, is make sure that you're talking to your customer, prior to building, while you're building, and get that product in customers' hands, while you're actually working on that process and in that prototyping phase. And then another thing I want to talk about is nurturing talent. I think that that's the other key to that, man. Like you said, bringing in that young talent, from U of L. If we're going to build up our ecosystem in the Midwest, then we're going to have young companies, come in and nurture this talent and use these new tech stacks that the larger companies aren't using. And that's how we're going to see our ecosystem grow and actually progress and be able to, maintain that talent here. Because in college, you're learning Python, maybe JavaScript are the 2 kind of like main things now. And no companies that are, are building using those types of tech stacks, or even the no code tech stack. So I think that is one of those main keys that we're going to have to really get into and solve. And I think startup companies and smaller companies will both benefit from, hiring that young talent, and that young talent will benefit from just that experience of working with that startup company.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I can't agree more. There's so much potential here, and everybody just we need to get aligned and develop the ecosystem as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I think those are benefits that people just don't look at when it comes to,
Yeah.
startup. Really, they always think about the money and the exit, but not the whole ecosystem that it's, creating and building.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And then imagine now, 5, 10 years down the line, Dan, some of these, the folks that work with you, you help developing are now some maybe create their own ideas and stuff, their own companies. Cause now they get their first, they get an inside look from you from a business standpoint as well of how to develop a company, not only just from a technical standpoint, but actually talking to customers,
Yeah.
improving the product, having processes in place, which is super beneficial for anyone. And that's how you start creating that life cycle here in the ecosystem and having more ideas come out and more founders getting started as well. You mentioned during that time, working with multiple customers and, getting that feedback loop and iterating things into the product. How did you decide on what features to work on? You probably got a lot of different feedback from different customers. How did you kind of align those and implement the features and say, we're going to work on this, we're going to scrap that? And
Mhm.
how did you kind of like, what were your mental thoughts of how do you work
Ooh,
that out?
yeah. Yeah. I wouldn't say so. There's an answer that I can give for what we did, and there's probably a better answer of what I would recommend others do that are listening. Um, so the first answer is um, we try to do the first way is we try to do everything that a customer asked, right? And that leads you to a road of death. And you hear it again, like we talked about it earlier. Like you hear every accelerator or something will say like they'll give you contradictory statements. It's listen to your customers or talk to your customers, listen to your customers, and also like don't spread yourself too thin. Don't serve everybody, right? And you're trying to balance like, and I was trying to balance like how do I listen to my customers but also have a focused product. And what they're implicitly saying is like say no to certain requests, right? Keep your product focused, keep your product narrow. And so I would say what we learned from that was like always have when you talk to customers, try to, as an intermediate, try to pitch them a bigger picture. Like when you hear customer complaints, don't solve the small problem, try to bundle it with a bunch of others feedback and solve a bigger problem or solve their underlying problem. Because I think a lot of the times customers, they have a need, right? And then rather than try to in a vacuum satisfy that need through the problem statement, try to find the need first and then try to see if there's a matching band behind it. That being said, like I'll give myself honest feedback. I don't think we did a great job of that part, and I felt like we were playing. The reason we were so fast is I think we were playing whack-a-mole a lot. Like
Mm.
we were trying to stomp out different fires rather than be holistic, right? And look from a bigger picture of, hey, if you have, what is your goal? How do we help you satisfy that goal, rather than try to play whack-a-mole? And I think maybe to lend some just wider feedback. When I self-reflect, I think being technical was both a blessing and a curse, right?
Mm.
I hear Ricky, I'm sure you hear that like a lot of founders, it's a disproportionate number of founders typically are not technical, right? And they look and say, oh, I wish I was technical, or I wish I had I'm looking for a technical co-founder. And I think the downside with being technical is that every nail everything looks like a nail, right? Or I always fall into the trap of like, hey, I'll just do it now. Like, hey, you have an issue, like let me just do it now. Let me just do it now. And so it really causes you to not be diligent with what you're spending your time on, right? Because I had the adage like, oh, it's easier for me to build it and fix it than it is to like like and if I didn't have that hurdle, if I had a much higher, like if tech talent was expensive, or I had to pass it on to a PM, like then that would cause me to slow down and be like, hey, like let me evaluate this before I decide and ship it off, right? And
Right.
so I think it's like it's unique to my experience, right? And I would say like if you're likewise like to anybody listen, to all you guys who are, if you're technical, like slow down, and if you're non-technical, with it, like like collect the thoughts before and treat that technical resource, which is precious, like a precious resource. Use it sparingly, right? Use it when you have a focused concept. And Ricky, I'm sure you hear this from other, like, where it just everything just gets filtered through and passed down, and then at the end of the day, regardless of which way you approach it, like you get I think what happens to a lot of startups, you get a really watered down product that does everything but nothing well.
Yeah, man. I run into the same issues as you. Like, as soon as, I mean, being able to do these things, it's like, okay, yeah, I can just throw that on the backlog and I'll do that next week. Let's get it done. And it does, cause you a lot of wasted time iterating and creating these features that might not be the base or the sweet spot for your product, for your customer. And now you're putting out a lot of small fires, while you're not even, doing the main thing really, really well yet. Yeah. So I think that's a lot of the issue.
Yeah.
And, speaking on that, Dan, go ahead, Chris.
No, you're fine. Go ahead, Rick.
Oh, speaking on that, Dan. So, after all, this iterations, you talk to the customer, you've, been at this thing for coming up on 2 years now. So what have you learned, and what are the next steps for Affinna? And you talked about really focusing and solving that problem. So have you found out exactly what that problem is, and where you started is where where you started? I know it's probably not where you're at now, and can you talk about that growth and the next steps from there?
Yeah. So I'll just share with the pod, we're in a pivotal moment of the company, and the two decision points we have right now is we either pivot or shut down, right? And the reason for that is because we watered down the product to a point where we couldn't become a viable business, right? So like when we opened, I said, like, hey, we saw this money flow go through secondaries, and money equals opportunity, right? And if you look at the product today, it does nothing of that, right? Like, it doesn't. So like the first advice is, like, when the crossing the chasm approach, right? Like, you have your laggards, people will never use your product because it's too new, right? The old tech stack, right? Like, you can't sell to them, right? But then your middle chunk, the one where you're going to make the money, like, focus on those customers as well. Listen to those. And then the early adopters, right? Like, those are your enthusiastic supporters. Like, I think we didn't stick close to the customers who had the money, right? Like, the big vision, right? We moved too quickly to people who would use the product today, right? And those customers, unfortunately, and you can tell by the product, like, it doesn't make money, right? Like, we do tickets now, but we do free tickets. We're in a very commoditized segment of the ticketing industry, right? Because we lost our North Star of why we started. Like, ticket scalping is a major problem where fees are 50%, right? On top of whatever the broker's making, right? But we're in a segment that's 5%, right? We're in a very commoditized segment for early adopters. And, the competition is very, very, very big here. So, like, the first thing is, like, I would say we moved too quickly from, like, finding a customer problem, sticking with it, talking to those customers who a lot of them are going to say no, right? And then moving down to a place where I felt more validated. Like, people are saying, like, yes, I'll use it. Yeah, I'll give you a try. Yeah, I'll use it. But it was great to see people use it, but there was no way we could make money, not because of the product wasn't good. It was because the market conditions were just like, it's free tickets are free tickets, right? Like, nobody expects to pay money for free tickets or a free ticketing platform. And then once you get to pay tickets, it's only 5%, right? Like, the market sets that rate. So, and I think that was like, we took our eyes off. And I think, again, it goes to all the lessons. Like, we were talking to customers and doing all that, but it's like, no, we should have, if I were to do things differently, it probably, of course, like, there's so many decisions to be made. Who knows where we could have probably ended up in the same spot. But yeah, like, right now we're at the stage of, like, I'm looking to you guys and I'm seeing, like, hey, like, we had a record month in March for paid tickets, right? But if you take whatever number you think in your head and multiply by 5%, it's not that much money, right? Like, and that's when I realized myself as the business, I was like, hey, we got a record month. I was pumped. And then I thought, how are we going to get to any form of profitability? How are we going to look like an attractive business at the end of the day? Right. Like, and that's when I was like, hey, this is a disconnect here. Like, there's no way I can raise the percentage. Right. And you always need to grow volume, but at 5% take rate, that's like, you need a ton of volume. Right. And it goes back to the coffee shop example. Like, yeah, I'm making 3%, but I'm making 3% on every swipe 24/7. I'm a 3% of your whole business, right? For any business. For us, it's like, yeah, I take 5%, but if you're hosting events just once a month, right? Like that's not that much, right? And so that's where we're at now. It's like, hey, like, for the better, we're not going to run into a brick wall and drive straight into it. We have some cash left. But we're definitely like, hey, let's hit the brakes and like reevaluate. Is there a better strategic position that we can? And I would encourage. The big takeaway is like, you can kill the idea. You don't need to kill the founder. Like, kill the idea, not the founder, right? You're still a founder. Don't take it personally, but there's probably better ideas out there, right? Or even better ways to approach the market that are like a better first starting point.
Yeah, Dan, I want to stay right there for a second because, I commend you. We're sitting here in April, right? And you're talking about a record month in March and having that self-reflection and self-awareness to say, "Oh, let me pump the
Yeah.
brakes and see if this is viable." Because many times I think you and I chatted about this of, people keep going and realizing maybe this is not the right idea, but they find out 6 months too late, and
Yeah.
it kind of has this like you said, you hit the wall as a big failure moment, where I think in this case you're kind of like falling, stumbling. You're not
Yeah.
failing, right? It's like we don't want to fail, but falling's okay. And you had this moment where you spent some time in South by Southwest, which was a great experience from you. But you said can you talk about some of the conversations with other founders you had there that kind of also allows you to have this reflection moment and say, what's next for Affinna, and what should I, what other ideas should I be giving my energy to?
Yeah. Look, I think it was the South by Southwest. It's more about the environment itself. So it's one of the few conferences that so it was my first time there and it was one of the few conferences where more happens outside the conference than in the conference. Like, we went there, we bought badges. I can't tell you, I didn't go to a single session. I just like hung out with all these other things outside, off venue. There's founders events all over. Tennessee House was there, Midwest House was there, Australia House was there, and these are all like just for like basically startups and founders. Like, it's intense, and they're all within like a walking distance of each other, right? Like, I'm talking like one bar and then 2 bars over is the next startup house. So it was just, you get a high density of feedback. And so the setup for the audience, like, we went down to South by Southwest thinking that, hey, we have a product, we have a marketing problem, right? Like, we need to generate more leads and get more customers through. And I spent so much time hanging with, ended up being like founders, entrepreneurs, VCs, investors, just talking. And sometimes, some of these conversations were 5-10 minutes. And I realized coming out of that, like, we had a strategic problem coming out of that. And South by was early March, right? And I came back and I was like, well, like, we're going to have a record, like, we were already on pace for a record month. And I was like, all right, like, this is great, right? Like, we went from no paid tickets in December to doubling in January to doubling in February, and already like, mid second week, I was like, all right, we already hit our February numbers. We just need to keep growing and keep growing. And I think that the two pieces of feedback that I'm after some time realizing, and I'll try to articulate as best I can, is that I think the Louisville ecosystem has a tendency to work hard. Like, it's keep your head down and work hard. You'll get there, right? Like this, again, like almost corporate prescriptive mindset of like, you just need to put more time and effort, work harder. And I was like looking around. It's like, I'm working really hard. Like I'm like, I'm working real hard. Like I'm going to do well. And then you get to South by, and the feedback you get is like, you got to work smarter, right? Like there's a better idea out there. And they're more of the mindset of like, that's where the, like, kill the idea, not the founder. Like, you're a great founder, but this is a bad idea. And I heard that more times in 4 days than I ever heard in Louisville. I don't think anybody in Louisville ever said to me, like, that's a dumb idea. Like, you're a great founder, and maybe I'm not, but like, I heard that more. And it, like, hearing that feedback so many times really made me think, like, hey, maybe, like, the first time you hear it, you're just like, oh, that's just like the quick shooters of the Bay Area, Austin. And I think a lot of the times, like, it wasn't personal because it's just like a quick interaction, it's just like a flippant remark. But I think it was just the idea that, like, down there, it's like, you can, there are better ways to spend your time, effort, and your investors' money, right? Like, find a higher value idea. And it was just like, I felt for the first time having my head pulled out of the water, right? Just like, again, Louisville's like a heads down. It's like, we're real salt of the earth people, right? Like, work hard, follow directions, work hard, keep your head down. You got it. Like, you can do it. Just keep working harder. And, we kind of critique the West Coast and saying, like, they just move too quickly through ideas, right? They don't stick with it. And I think that there needs to be just kind of a compromise or a balance of both, right? Like, if you're not feeling traction, if you put your heart and soul into something and you're still not feeling traction after, a good chunk of what I would term a decent career, like, yeah, you're still a great founder. Just, do a different idea, right? Like, let it, like, cycle through it quicker, right? And there's we talk about the West Coast and people run through ideas in 3 weeks, right? Out here, it's like probably 3-4 years, right? You're still trying to raise money. And it's like, well, maybe at that, like, let's compromise here. Maybe 3 months or 3 quarters kind of thing. Like, still give it some grit, but like, maybe like, and you hear this again, it's like, don't fall in love with an idea. And I thought, like, oh, I don't do that. Like, and then afterwards, I'm like, oh man, I am in love with this idea. Like, yeah, I got to start dating somebody else, right? I got to date another idea, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was, and there's so many, like, sprinklings of, just nuggets of comments. And I think the great thing is, like, there were a couple, like, I would say billionaire founders that I just had like a 5-minute talk with, and they were just like, yeah, you should do that. Like, and so when you get that level, like, when you read about them in books, right? That kind of, and you hear, and then I just said, like, hey, I'm a first time founder and, like, I'm struggling. And they're like, hey, just, do this, right? This is what I did when I was in your shoes. Just do this, right? To get that really, like, and it was like a quick comment, right? And you're just like, wow, like, this is a level of depth, again, like networking, right? Like, it's a level of depth you can't read about. Like, you have to get it in person. And it's a very personalized piece of feedback that I'm trying to absorb still to this day.
Yeah, man.
I think it goes to something to say about, like, the experience of the region and those founders and VCs that you're talking to. I mean, when you talk to folks in Louisville, we haven't seen a lot of exits. We haven't seen a lot of companies that were successful. So we don't really know what that looks like. I don't think, I'd say, from a general perspective. I'd say we're looking at, oh, your business is doing multi-million dollars a year. Oh, that's awesome. If you can do that, then you're winning. Versus the guys out, from the Bay, they're like, that's not $1 billion business. You're not making hundreds of millions a year. Then that's not going to be, a viable, way to go. And I think it also speaks to early on what you were saying was going for customers or going for revenue. And I think that somehow, over the last 5-6 years, we've gotten those things mixed up. As if we have enough, adoption and customers, we're going to get those investors versus, hey, no, if we have revenue, then they're going to want to invest because they know they're going to make money.
Yeah.
So I think that that's one of the key things that, I mean, even from my perspective, I think even starting our startup, that's where I was going back and forth at first. I'm like, man, I need all this adoption, metaverse. Yeah. And then it's like, hold up. We're not making any money from metaverse. We got to get back to making money and making revenue. So I think that that's one of the key things. And I think that that's coming back, with this climate that we're in as far as, investment and startup is folks are going back to those revenues and where those revenues going to come from. So I love that you gave that example of, hey, yeah, we're going after adoption because it feels good. We got folks that are willing to use and give us feedback, but that's not where our revenue is coming from. So where we're doing something over here that could be a great, small business, it's not going to be that unicorn that we were expecting, in the beginning if we keep going this way, and we have to pivot. And I think that that's something for founders to recognize, and you have to understand what do you actually want out of, your startup. Do you want to be beholden to those VC dollars, or do you want to, run a small business in that way? So I think that that's something that folks, have to figure out what they want to do. And that's another pivot point, there, if I'm going to jump ship or I'm going to keep, running this business as a small business per se.
Yeah.
Yeah, Dan, you mentioned something, throughout your story of like going through that, hearing that feedback from South by Southwest with founders, and really having that moment of reflection and awareness to say, kill the idea, not the founder. I think sometimes in certain ecosystems it's the reverse, right? People kill the founder, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm kind of curious to hear your thoughts of how do we kind of embrace the idea of failure and not killing the founder, and supporting the founder through its change and pivot. And then secondly, like, mentally, and like when you have to make that change and pivot, how are you dealing with that, and how will you encourage another founder that maybe that's going through a similar type of change?
Yeah. I think it's one of those things. I think at least culturally, Louisville, and this is just probably even beyond startups, zooming out, like Louisville, it's a cultural thing. I don't know what the right balance is, but I would say like the first off is like share your failures. Like we should be, like I think at least for me, I texted 2 founders as soon as I made the decision to shut down, because I heard they mentioned or shared stories previously about like, or, were common knowledge of they shut down. Right. And so I reached out to them and be like, hey, how did you process it? What was your, how did you process that emotion? How did you talk about, and I think, to any founder out there or future founder who wants to talk about a shutdown, I'm happy to sit down and talk to you about it, talk to you about mine. We can at least, exchange stories to make you feel like you're not alone in this process. And that really helped me. Both of these founders are great. We probably know them. I won't mention them in my name, but like we know them. They're successful founders now. If you know that track record, you can probably think of a few people. And like they were super supportive of helping me just talk through it and feel like I'm not alone on this journey. The second thing is just, again, going back to the cultural, it's like, I think there's a very like, there's a natural human phenomena of just like, you don't like to share your failures. Right. But I think Louisville, especially like, I remember like people here always like to present to their best, right? Like both in terms of story and also in dress. Like I don't dress that well. I always show up to everything in t-shirts and jeans, right? And I remember like in the West Coast, like I remember my wife, she's from the area, and she would always be like, you got to dress up. And like, no, honey, I'm going to the Bay. Like I'm wearing the Bay Area uniform, right? And I fit in just perfectly fine. And I remember my first Vote Award interview here in Louisville. The first time, I didn't get in the first time at Vote Awards, so keep trying. But the first time I showed up I showed up in t-shirt and jeans again. And I was like, are you sure you don't want to get dressed up? And I was like, oh, it's startup, it's entrepreneurial, they get it. And I'll name him Akil. He's always dressed up to the nines. He always looks super good. I come in and I sit down and I'm like, who the hell is this guy? He has like the 3-piece suit, looks immaculate. And then I'm like talking to him and he's like, oh, I got a successful business, blah, blah, blah. And I'm just like, man, I'm going to get smoked today. Like he's already like, I signed these corporate customers. I'm like trying to fish it out of him. And I'm like, oh man, I'm just a pre-seed idea. Right. But I think that there's, both in the corporate life, like people, and that's why people don't like change and risk. Like, but, if I was going to subset the ecosystem to just the startup community, it's like, don't like, you're already going to fail. Like we always say this, 9 out of 10 startups will fail. Right. So like to the startup community, like it's going to be very different than the corporate, like the rest of the culture, but like share your failures. It helps other founders. It makes it more okay to fail because we know it's going to happen, right? Like we know it's not like anything else where your startup's going to die before you even start. That's okay. And it goes back to what we said in the beginning, like just trying is a success. Like it doesn't matter the result, just getting out there and trying. And then, just mentally, emotionally right now, it's like, I think, again, pulling my head up out of the water, like going to South by, hearing all these other founders say like, hey, this is my first startup. This is, and to the converse of like, we hold success of like these metrics of what success looks like to such a high degree, right? But when you see people going through it day to day, that's like a different story. So I'll share like a quick, I interviewed for this other startup like 4 years ago. These guys were killing it, $20 million Series A, crushing it, right? Doing everything that you think a hot startup would be doing. And they were like, they're younger than me. It was one of the first times I'm interviewing for a job, reporting to somebody who's like 5-10 years younger than me, right? I caught up with one of them at South by. We had breakfast together, and he is just getting hammered by the board, right? He's now an employee of his own company, right? And it's been 6-7 years now. And so again, like you can open the newspaper, and they probably raised the Series B now, like with a pretty good number, right? But they don't own my impression was they don't own the company anymore. They're not the founders anymore, right? They're just people who are now reporting to the board. And so, and that's, I think in Louisville, if that company was in Louisville, that'd be a successful company, hands down, right? Like, so just hearing that, it's like, it just looks different. And like, you just got to be, you got to say like, hey, what kind of compromise do I want to make, right? Like, do I want a small business, or do I want to, do I want a big business that maybe makes a great headline and looks good, but at the end of the day, like I have no equity in it, and et cetera. And just like, telling all the other founders is like, you have options, right? Like failure is an option, and it's not a bad option, right? Because if you fail, like you can just start another company tomorrow, right? Like get your next idea and take all your lessons you learned and start afresh, right? And I think that's like, I think just encouraging founders to keep, fail fast and then just get back up, right? Like, and you're still a founder at heart. Like you can find another company, you can join another company, you can be part of another company, but like, yeah, just keep doing it, right? And that's part of the process, right?
Yeah, no, I definitely think that failure is a part of the process and is a necessary part, because that experience is what helps, create those bigger companies. I think oftentimes we see the young founders, but then we don't see the guys that are behind them that are actually coaching those young founders, because the young founders are the ones that have the energy to get up and do everything you need to do to, run a startup and launch a startup. But they need that coaching behind them to actually be successful and, miss some of those pitfalls that we probably all run into, not having, some of that knowledge, behind us as we're, building our companies. So I think that as your ecosystem has more of those people that have tried and, haven't been as successful as we wanted, will help ultimately build that successful unicorn, for that ecosystem. But we have to get more input into that ecosystem so that we can have those folks that are here to tell you, hey, Dan, no, that's not the right idea. Like, let's go for something, different. And I think that if we had more of those people, then we would, honestly make better investments, with the money that we do have in our ecosystem, because half the time, I mean, it seems like it's a shot in the dark, either way. But if we had more experience, then we would be able to make, better decisions.
100%. You can't agree more, Ricky.
All right. I think we're coming up on time, but I want to bring something back. I didn't tell Rick that, but I have a couple of quick fire round questions for you, Dan. Quick answers only. A good, fun way to end this segment. Number one, what is your favorite book recommendation and why?
Oof. I'll give two. The Lean Startup. I hear it over and over again. You got to read it. And then Peter Thiel's 0 to 1. Yeah.
Cool. Love it. What is the best piece of advice that you have been given?
You need to be 10 times better than your competition or different. That's it.
Good piece right there. I love that. I love that. And then lastly, what two people would you pair together to birth the ultimate entrepreneur?
Oh, this would be funny. All right, Elon Musk is one, and then who would we cyborg with him? Oh man, Jeff Bezos. That'd be one
Okay.
weird cyborg. Yeah.
I love it. I've been kind of Rick and I've been talking about this. Like we've been kind of big into biographies of like autobiographies of founders, and so like I think this is one of our favorite questions is kind of understand the mindset of so many different entrepreneurs. But Dan, I just want to thank you for your time today, and your openness, being vulnerable. I think like the conversation is so needed for our ecosystem and many founders, not only here but across the world. And I think your ideals and your thought processes are so on point. So really appreciate you today, and Rick and I, we are here for you for anything you need, and we're going to be supporting you from the sidelines, and you let us know how we can assist you on your, we know you can do something amazing in the future, and so we're excited for your journey, and really appreciate your time today.
Chris, Ricky, thank you for having me. Thank you for letting me share my story, and yeah, I hope it helps the next generation of founders. And yeah, we'll always be in the mix and part of the ecosystem. I'm part of the ecosystem now, right? So
There you go.
likewise, would love to be a resource to you guys and any other founder out there who, through your ups and through your eventual downs, would love to be helpful.
All right. Thanks,
All right.
Dan, man. And always, man, keep making moves, baby.
Appreciate it. We'll do. We'll keep
Until
in
next
touch.
time.
See you
Peace.
guys.